Welcome to Space Month Cambridge. This year, we have curated an online magazine on the theme of commercial viability and prospects of asteroid mining, with select interviews of pioneers and experts in the field of astrophysics, space law, and space mining. Through our interviews, we try to explore the current scientific, geopolitical, and legal challenges and implications of conducting asteroid mining. As a layperson, it is difficult to fully grasp the reality of asteroid mining, especially when it is at least 30 years into the future and shall require far more sophisticated technology than we currently possess to conduct actual mining exercises. However, to those in the industry, it is not the technical feat of the task that is daunting, but the fact that the asteroid mining industry is a complex business with vague regulations at best. We are at the cusp of an exciting and terrifying journey. And if there is anything we must learn from our experiences on Earth, is that as a community of scientists, lawyers, and entrepreneurs, we must collaborate to build a safe, inclusive, and sustainable future. A future that accounts not only for the environment in space, but also on Earth.
I'm always impressed with what engineers can do, given the motive and given the financial resources. It's maybe not a coincidence, that's an understatement, that it was billionaires who were able to afford to develop commercial enterprises to enter Earth orbit. And for asteroid mining, I would say it's, the case seems to be clear that it will be commercial enterprises that do this. It seems that, I'm really impressed with the national space programs, ESA, JAXA, NASA, with quite a few asteroid missions so far, cumulatively, since the 1990s. And so, maybe NASA and ESA and JAXA are the originators of the concept of exploring asteroids, and their data provide the some of the critical information necessary, and also Earth-based astronomers provide the critical information necessary that will be used by asteroid mining entrepreneurs. I don't really see that NASA or ESA are going to rush out and start mining asteroids. I think it's also pretty clear in my view that unless there is an overwhelming political motive, sort of a international rivalry among nation states, I doubt that humans are going to be the miners. So, we can sort of put away some of those Hollywood films where, rough and rugged miners are out there on some asteroid mining it. I think it will be robotic. I think the exploration needed to find the right asteroid will be robotic. Now, there's a huge gap between finding the right asteroid to mine and then mining it. Yeah. To me, that still seems quite far-fetched. If I shouldn't use the term far-fetched, far off in the future.
Yeah.
It seems to me, because we're talking about not just putting a spacecraft in orbit or hundreds of spacecraft in orbit like commercial enterprises have done. We're talking about launching a large number of spacecraft to find the right asteroid to mine. That right there is a huge endeavor, because it's actually much harder to get spacecraft to escape the Earth's gravity well than it is to go into Earth orbit. And then the communications with a spacecraft that are millions of kilometers, tens of millions of kilometers away are daunting relative to communicating with an Earth orbiting spacecraft. And so just the exploration part, I mean the economic exploration part, is daunting. But when you talk about processing,
Yeah.
Maybe millions of tons of ore to bring back thousands of tons of the good stuff, that's a pretty daunting exercise. It would definitely take an Elon Musk or a Jeff Bezos or a Richard Branson or some other billionaire out there. I'm not personally not really a tremendous fan of there being these hundreds and hundreds of billionaires, but they're the ones who are going to push this through, because it's not going to be done by a $10 million capitalization startup company. It's just
the problems with mining space resources, either the asteroids or the moon, which are the only two real candidates for now, are not really technical, not really scientifically technical. It's not finding out new ways to do things, to make rockets or something. It's making them work, making them cheap, and sending them out to do the prospecting, and then learning how to deal with objects like asteroids, which are very cold, probably made of, have no gravity, are made of aggregate of rock, rubble piles, they're called. So that, and those behave very strangely. So there's a bit of fundamental physics there, but it's mostly engineering. So there's no, I don't think there's any really new physics needs to be put in there, for instance. Unless, of course, we manage to get some of the attempts to get fusion rockets working actually pay off. But I think that's a bit of a long-term, hope rather than a realistic thing in the short term. But I'm talking mostly over the next 10 to 20 years, where I think there'll be a lot of preparation by government-sponsored surveys for asteroids. And then there will also be a growth in a market for asteroid material, which will be in orbit. And then once that market exists and we've learned where all the resources are, that would be the time when people could start mining those resources. Problem now is that there are so many different players going to space, going to the moon particularly in the next 10 years, even 5 years, that it's going to get very difficult to negotiate. This isn't the USA versus the USSR anymore, like it was in the 1960s, when if they decided what the agreement was going to be, everybody else had to toe the line. Not anymore, right? So it gets a very difficult regime for policymakers to work with. The sort of things I would hate to see, for instance, would be I would personally dislike seeing any hint of human activity on the moon viewed from a night on the ground on the Earth. So some people, the helium-3 mining, for instance, would happen by strip mining the top few meters, couple of meters off or the lunar mare, and you would see those stripes, because it has to be hundreds of kilometers to get enough helium. So I think that's a terrible idea. Some people might think, though, that if we had a settlement on the moon and you could see the bright lights of that from the Earth, they might find that inspiring. And it's not obvious what the right answer is. I think many cultures, probably all cultures, revere the moon as an important object in their cosmology. So it would be, I suspect, on balance, a very poor idea to make anything visible.
I think we have an excellent piece of international legislation, which is the 1979 Moon Agreement. It is a very well thought out and very well drafted. And the problem with this one is a visionary, at least 3 or 4 decades ahead of its time. Now the things have changed, yes, but I think the basic principles remain the same. And I think there's too much hype, and I use the word intentionally, hype, too much hype of privatization on that. And one thing is very important, the question of the legal risks. You have alluded to one point, which is property right. I think all the debates we hear nowadays about exploitation of resources, both at the government level and private sector level, and in the academics. I will say 99%, if it's not 100%, is only property rights. That issue is important. To me, beside that, or equally important, I can even say some more important, the property right is the legal risk of question of liability. The liability of the actors involved, and that is a very important, and also possible liability of the sponsors of these actors. And so that I'll address a little later on. So my view is that the 1969 Moon Agreement should be taken as a first very important step towards an international regime. Now, there's a misinformation, and I would say propaganda, misleading, kind of discussions. And I will say even distorted information about the Moon Agreement. Now, again, I say the 99% discussion has concentrated on Article 11, para 1 of the Moon Agreement, that Moon and its resources are common heritage of mankind. And that's it. The readers, scholars, the government just stop there. But that is less than half of the story, because that concept need to be understood within the provisions of the treaty that was intentionally drafted that article that way. The second, particularly in view of para 5 of Article 11. Now, before I explain that, let me see that I think there's not much information put in the media and writings and the debates at even the government level. Common heritage of mankind principle was actively promoted by the United States, along with the third world countries. Soviet Union was very much against that. I think the compromise was reached by adding what I mentioned. The meaning of the concept should come from within the provisions or under the provisions of the Moon Agreement, rather than referring it to other regimes, for example, of the sea convention. So that the point is, now the US or the government, especially with the issuance of the executive order last year, has deviated, 180 degree its position on that. And the American scholars also are ignoring or not acknowledging that role the US government played in the promotion and adoption of the common heritage of mankind. Now, reading the agreement itself, it makes very clear that concept remains concept. Today, even if 193 states ratify this agreement, this will remain a concept unless it is implemented through an international regime, which needs to be implemented under para 5 of Article 11. So that regime has to take into consideration some suggestions which are included in Article 11, para 7. One of the key suggestions is that there should be equitable sharing of the benefits of the exploitation of the resources. I think there's also very concerted effort to defame not only Moon Agreement itself, but also this provision I mentioned to you. It says equitable sharing. It doesn't say equal sharing. And equitable sharing means when that formula that takes place, it has to be taken into consideration the interest of the developing countries, of course, but more importantly, the interest of those states which have directly and indirectly contributed to the exploitation, efforts.
And ultimately, the challenge with collective or centralized control systems, economically or politically, is that they can be started off with innovators and early adopters with the best and finest intentions. but invariably the most aggressive, narcissistic individuals and leaders amongst us.
Yeah.
Again, it's not a criticism, it's just an observation. Those who are most capable of aggressively gathering resources for their own benefit or their own corporation's benefit can then take leadership positions in those organizations once they're set up, and then completely turn 90 degrees the objectives, the sentiment, the morals of that organization. Once those central command mechanisms are set up, they then get exploited by those who are corrupt. Invariably, the corrupt will find their way into it and exploit it in the second generation onwards. At all costs, Earth has to be protected as a meadow. Earth is a fragile, beautiful meadow in a warm, luxurious, temperate, habitable zone that we must nurture and protect at all costs. And the only way, if again, back to first principles, closed systems, Malthus, Donatello Meadows, limits to growth, whatever the framework one might think, the way to deal with closed systems is not to reduce your operation within that system, but if we're going to be true to our ideals as a human species, again, it's not right, it's not wrong, but we are an expansionist species. The very nature of caring and loving your children, by definition, requires growth and expansion. One cannot vilify the necessary mechanisms for expanding the frontier, expanding commerce, and expanding resources, and at the same time saying, I love my children or my family or my friends or my community, and I want to do the best to expand for them. And of course, how we do that sometimes gets messy, it sometimes gets ruthless, frankly, and some people live only by that for its own sake. But the point is that outside of Earth's habitable zone or the sun's habitable zone, the rest of space is kind of a cold industrial zone, or many places, not necessarily gravity well planets, but the asteroid belt in particular, one might consider, unless we find evidence to the contrary, it's safe to consider that as an industrial zone. Full of resources, that's where we want to build a lot of industrial technology, shipyards, large galleons to sail across the solar system, and to build our civilization growth.
To learn more about the curious world of asteroid mining, you can check out the extended interviews on our website.